Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you all are doing well. As you know, this lecture is a part of our ongoing lecture series on drama. And so far, we have explored what drama is. We also traced its historical development and discussed its major elements in detail. And today, we are going to take the next step. We are going to looking at how drama can be classified, or what are the different types of drama. So from this lecture to upcoming 4 or 5 lectures maybe, we are going to cover this diversity, or you can say different types of drama. So let's begin. As we all know that drama is diverse, and to understand it clearly, you can think of drama as a big wardrobe, as you can see on the screen. Inside a big wardrobe, you will find different outfits, some formal, some casual, some traditional, some even experimental. And you believe that each outfit has its own style, its own purpose, and the outfit tells the world something about the person wearing it, right? Drama works exactly the same way. It comes in different types, and each of this type has its own flavor, and each of these type reflects human life in unique ways. For instance, there are some dramas which make us laugh until our stomach hurt, other make us cry. There are some which make us think deeply about the society, and there are also some drama which transport us into the magical world of gods and demons. So it can be said, just like clothes, drama adapts to the occasion. Sometimes it's serious, sometimes playful, and sometimes even fantastical. Agree? Also, life itself is quite dramatic, and you can say drama is simply life reflected back to us, organized in the form of stories. So today, as we are going to open this wardrobe of drama, I want you all to imagine yourself trying on each outfit and ask yourself, how does this type of drama feel, or which one fits me best? So today we shall begin with tragedy. You can say the earliest form of drama. And before we dive into today's topic, let me ask you something. So when you hear this word tragedy, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Some of you might think of a recent news event. Others may recall or a sad, or you can say emotional film. And some of you, those literature enthusiasts, are probably already thinking about Shakespeare or Greek drama. And you know what? You all are correct in your own way. Why? Because tragedy exists not only in literature but in life itself. How? Because it successfully reflects human suffering, our day to day conflict, loss, and emotional struggle. So, today, building on everything we have already studied in our previous lecture, we will look at tragedy as a dramatic form. And we will try to understand its meaning, its purpose, and why it continues to move audiences across time and cultures. So let's start with the attempt to find the answer of this fundamental question. And the question is, what exactly is a tragedy? Now, I know it might seem like a very obvious question, because the word tragedy gets thrown around quite casually in our day-to-day conversation. For instance, we sometimes say things like, it's a tragedy that it's raining on our picnic day, or maybe the traffic jam was tragic. But what about the literary tragedy? Well, that's something entirely different, something which is far more profound and purposeful. Actually, the word tragedy comes from the Greek word tragedia, which literally means goat song. Now, before you start wondering what goats have to do with the Hamlet, let me clarify. Actually, this refers to the ancient Greek practice of sacrificing a goat during Dionysiac festival, where these plays were performed. But let's move beyond etymology to meaning. At its core, tragedy is a dramatic form that presents the downfall of a noble or exceptional individual through the combination of personal flaws, we better known as hamartia, or maybe the fate and the circumstances beyond their control. Have you noticed I said noble or exceptional individual? And this is crucial. Why? Tragedy isn't just about bad things happening to people, but it is more about the fall of someone who starts from a position of greatness or high standing. Think about it this way. If I told you a story about a homeless person who lost his last 100 rupees, you might feel sympathy, even sadness. But if I told you about a beloved king who loses his kingdom, his family, and ultimately his life because of a single fatal decision, that's tragedy. Now, let's move to the definition of tragedy. So, here we are. The great philosopher Aristotle, writing in his Poetics around 335 BCE, and Aristotle gave us what remains the most influential definition of tragedy. He writes, and I'm quoting Aristotle here, you can see on the screen the definition. Aristotle defines tragedy in Book 6 as an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, in a language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of the play, in the form of action, not of narrative, through pity and fear affecting the proper purgations of these emotions. So, this is the definition that Aristotle has given. It may seem puzzled, and that's perfectly normal. Let's break this definition down together. So first, look at this word serious. It means that tragedy must deals with weighty matters such as life, death, or honor, justice, love, even betrayal. So tragedy is not a light entertainment. Secondly, complete. A good tragedy must has a clear beginning, middle, and end. Why? Because it's a whole story, not a fragment. Third, of a certain magnitude, which means the events must be significant enough to matter or to have the real consequences. But here is the most interesting part, and that's bit about the pity and fear and the purgation. Aristotle believed that watching tragedy doesn't just entertain us, it actually cleanses us emotionally. And this process is called catharsis. You can think of it like this: when we watch a tragic hero struggle and fall, We feel pity for his suffering and also fear that something similar could happen to us. But by experiencing these emotions safely in the theater or while reading, we somehow purge ourselves of them. So we have feeling, not happy exactly, but somehow cleansed or enlightened and maybe even relieved. Have any of you ever watched a really sad movie and felt strangely better afterward, even though you cried? So that is catharsis. That's catharsis in action. Now let's move to our next slide. So it's time to know where did this all this begin. Let's take a step back in time. Just picture this, it's 5th century BCE in Athens, and the city is at the height of its power and cultural influence. Almost all the citizens gather in the great theatre of Dionysus, carved into the hillside of Acropolis, to witness something extraordinary, and you can see that theatre on the slide. This is where tragedy as we know it was born. Not in a classroom, not in a library, but in a sacred space which is dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and interestingly enough, transformation and rebirth. The Greeks didn't just watch these plays for entertainment. These were religious festivals, the civic events, competitions, and the place where the greatest poets of that age, like Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, would present their latest work to the audience of up to 15,000 people or more than that. Imagine that 15,000 people from all walks of life gathering to watch those stories about gods, heroes, and the fundamental questions of human existence. Now, the question is, why did tragedy emerge in Athens at this particular moment in history? And this is a question that has fascinated scholars for several centuries. So, here we have many factors which came together. First, Athens was experiencing that unprecedented prosperity and democratic development. People had time and also resources for cultural pursuit. Second, you can say the city was grappling with that rapid social change. Traditional values were being questioned, new ideas about justice and morality were emerging. And the third reason, maybe perhaps most importantly, the Athenians were dealing with the tension between human ambition and divine will, or maybe individual, you can say individual desires and social responsibility. Sound familiar? Because these are still the questions that we struggle in our day-to-day life. Next, we have Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the three great playwrights or tragedy playwrights. Let me tell you a bit about each playwright because understanding them help us to understand tragedy itself. Let's dive a little deeper into the life of these big three. First up, Aeschylus. He is basically the original mastermind of Greek tragedy, or we can call him father of tragedy. He didn't just write plays, but he changed the whole game. Aeschylus introduced a second actor on stage, which meant instead of a solo performance, now there was real dialogue, conflict, and drama. His plays like Orestia grapple with huge themes such as justice, revenge, fate, and the very evolution of civilization. However, his characters feel more like superheroes, larger than life. And these larger than life heroes facing those epic dilemmas. So basically, when we read Aeschylus, we actually are looking at the roots of dramatic storytelling. Now, let's talk about Sophocles. If Aeschylus is the pioneer, Sophocles is the one who makes things personal. Why? Because he brought tragedy down to a human level. It focuses on real people with real emotions. He in fact added a third actor and further opened the door to more complex interactions. His plays like Oedipus Rex and Antigone, Sophocles digs into the psychology of his character and tries to find out why they make this kind of decision, and how their virtues and mistakes shape their destinies. So you can say his stories aren't just about fate, but they are more about the moral responsibility or loyalty. And he gave us those moments when we wonder, am I making the right choice? Then there is Euripides. You can picture him as the playwright who is not afraid to stir the pot. Because Euripides questioned everything, almost everything, the gods, society, even the very nature of justice. He also gave women powerful roles like Medea, who is a complex, passionate, and an absolutely unforgettable character. His plays often challenges that status quo. Because he asks those tough questions about war, about religion, and even social justice. And Euripides wasn't satisfied with easy answers. He wanted to show us the messiness of human emotions, or you can say the dark corners of the soul. So if you are looking for a drama that is raw, real, and sometimes uncomfortable, that's the style of Euripides. And the question here is, why do we still talk about these three after more than 2000 years? Why? Because their plays aren't just about ancient Greece, but they are about us. They all struggle with themes such as love, loss, ambition, guilt, and that never ending search for meaning. So, no matter what century we live in, these are the universal question, and this universality is part of what makes tragedy such an enduring form. It's not bound by time or culture, because it explores the deepest aspect of human nature. Now, as we are speaking of universal aspects. Let's examine what make a tragedy actually tragic. So, what are the essential elements that these ancient masters discovered, and that the writer of even today still use? All right, everyone, this is where we get into the mechanics of tragedy. You can think of this as you are looking under the hood of a car, because we are going to see how tragedy actually works. And Aristotle identifies 6 elements of tragedy, and remarkably, they still hold true value even today. Although we already have covered them in one of our previous lecture, uh, but let me walk you through each one in a quick manner. So the first element, or the important element we have, that is plot, or you can call it mythos. Now let's break down what Aristotle meant by plot, or you can say the soul of tragedy. So Aristotle writes, at its heart, the plot must be well structured with a clear beginning, middle, and an end, and each step logically leading to the next. All actions revolves around one main action. The story follows the tragic hero as their journey shifts from good fortune to downfall, and often because of their own flaw or a crucial error in judgment. So, what is the essential part? The essential here is that sense of inevitability. Events should unfold in such a way that both surprise and feel naturally connected. It must feel connected naturally. And finally, the result. The audience experience catharsis, that is the profound emotional release. And that's the central to what makes tragedy so powerful. Second element, we have the character, ethos. In a tragedy, most important character is the tragic hero. And one thing is important to remember here, not all character can be tragic hero. There are specific requirements. First, they must be noble, not necessarily royal, but elevated in some way. It means they have something significant to lose. Secondly, they must be good, not perfect, but fundamentally decent, which means we need to care about what happened to them. Third, and this is important, crucial, they must have a tragic flow, the most important thing. And this is what the Greeks called hamartia. And this isn't necessarily a moral failing. It could be excessive pride, blind love, or even a noble quality that taken too far. Let me give you a perfect example of tragic hero. Oedipus. He is a king, belonged to noble class, he is intelligent and caring about his people, so he was good. But he is also proud and very quick to anger, and that is his tragic flow. His very determination to save his city, the noble impulse, leads him to discover the horrible truth about himself. And one more important characteristic is the tragic hero must also be relatable. Aristotle writes that they should be like us, not so perfect that we can't identify them with them, or not so flawed that we don't care about their fate. Now the third element is thought. This element refers to the idea. It talks about the theme or the moral questions that a particular tragedy explored. So great tragedies are not about just about individual suffering, but they are about that universal human concern. Now the fourth element we have is diction. We call it lexis. This is about the dialogue, or you can say language of a tragedy, and it is more important than you might think. As per Aristotle, tragic language should be elevated. It should be formal, even poetic. Why? Because it must matches the nobility of the character and the seriousness of the theme. So basically the language needs to match the magnitude of the moment, magnitude of that story. But it's not just about being fancy. On the other side, tragic diction should serve a purpose. Like it must lift the action above the everyday life, or make it universal rather than only personal. Next element we have is music, melodies. When we talk about music in Greek tragedy, it is important to remember that how central the chorus was to the entire experience. Here, the chorus was not just background. Historically, it was a group of performers who sang, danced, and commented on the unfolding action. In ancient Athens, the chorus should be as large as to 12 to 15 members, and their performances were accompanied by instruments. This chorus helped to set the mood. In fact, it expressed the communal emotions, and sometimes it even advised or warned the tragic hero. For example, in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, the chorus reflect on the events. They react to the hero's decisions, and also remind the audience of those moral and spiritual lessons. More broadly, it can be said that music in tragedy encompasses the rhythm and sound of the play itself. The last element we have is spectacle, opsis. This is the visual elements, the costume, mask, staging. And actually, Aristotle considered this the least important element, but it still matters. He emphasized that spectacle should serve the story, but it should never distract. It should never distract from the story. For instance, when Oedipus appears with his eyes gouged out, or when Lady Macbeth sleepwalks with those bloody hands, these visual moments reinforce that internal tragedy. So it can be said that these are the elements, and the most beautiful thing about these elements that they all work together. And another thing we need to know that over the centuries, different types of tragedy have emerged, and each type of tragedy with its own characteristics and purposes. Now it's time to explore these different types. So this is where it all began. Classical tragedy, or you can say the Greek and the Roman tragedies that we are going to discuss here. So these tragedies follow Aristotle rules quite closely, and basically deals with that mythological or historical subjects. For example, Aristotle himself praised Sophocles' Oedipus Rex as the model tragedy, and stating it in his famous Poetics that it perfectly demonstrates the principles of plot, character, and catharsis. Actually, the ancient Greeks saw tragedy not just as entertainment, but as we already discussed, tragedy or these plays were like a vital civic ritual for Greek people. And the characteristics are clear: the noble protagonist, royalty or heroes, plots drawn from well known myths or maybe history, which further focus on fate versus free will, and finally the crucial element of catharsis. On the other hand, Roman tragedies, although inspired by Greek originals, they often added their own spectacle. For instance, Seneca's versions were famous for their philosophical monologues and that gruesome violence. However, the idea of catharsis, that emotional cleansing, and Aristotle described, that has sparked centuries of debate among critics. Let me tell you about Oedipus Rex, which we often called the perfect classical tragedy. Let's understand the story. So Oedipus is a king who receives a prophecy that he will kill his father and marry his own mother. Horrified, everything tried to avoid this fate, but in trying to escape his destiny, he actually fulfills it. On opening nights in ancient Athens, audience reportedly gasped audibly by these key moments, such as when Oedipus realized the truth about his origins. So the genius of this story is that every action Oedipus takes to avoid the prophecy actually brings it closer to the fulfillment. And it is a perfect example of that tragic irony. Why? Because the audience knows what the character doesn't, and we watch in fascination and horror as he walks towards his doom. Sigmund Freud, the well-known psychologist, was so struck by this tale that he coined that Oedipus complex term, and he used the story as a metaphor for unconscious desires and family dynamics. So the question is, what make this classical tragedy so powerful? So it is the inexorability of it all. Once the wheels are set in motion, nothing can stop them. And there is something both terrifying and oddly comforting about that inevitability. In fact, T.S. Eliot, reflecting on Greek tragedy, remarks that its perfection lies in its sense of order amid chaos. The audience is brought face to face with the limits of human agency, and yet leaves the theatre with a renewed sense of awe and humility. The enduring legacy of these works is quite clear, that even today with their themes and conflicts resonate, and in fact invite us to confront our own destiny and choices. Now, let's fast forward about 2000 years to Elizabethan England, a vibrant era that saw the flourishing of tragedy far beyond Shakespeare. This period was marked by intense competition among great dramatists, and each one of them striving to leave a lasting mark on the stage. Although William Shakespeare is arguably the most celebrated playwright of this era, but he was also joined by a host of other talented playwrights. And their works surely shaped this genre of tragedy. Not only Shakespeare has expanded the scope of tragedy. Why? Because classical tragedy focused on fate and divine will. On the other hand, Shakespearean tragedy is much more interested in characters and their choices. His heroes aren't just victim of fate, but they are active participants in their own destruction. For example, we can take Macbeth. We all know that the witches plant the idea of kingship in his mind, but they don't force him to murder Duncan. That's the decision, or you can say choice, and all the choices that follows, they all were the choice of Macbeth himself. On the other side, another great playwright of Elizabethan era was Christopher Marlowe, and he often hailed as Shakespeare's greatest rival. He injected tragedy with ambition and poetic grandeur. His most famous play, Dr. Faustus, tell us the story of a scholar who had knowledge and power and who captured the spirit of the Renaissance curiosity and risk as well. Another giant of this era was Ben Jonson, and he was known for his intellectual rigor and that's satire. His tragedies, such as Sejanus' His Fall, it explored the corruption and also the ambition in Roman context. So, the important question here is what distinguished Elizabethan tragedy? And the answer is its blend of classical influences and new dramatic energy. These playwrights expanded the scope of tragedy. Why? Because they are not focusing on fate and divine will only, but they introduced character, choice, and the consequences of ambition. So the legacy of Elizabethan tragedy lies in its enduring emotional complexity, or you can say the historical richness. Now let's turn to one of the most electrifying genre of tragedy, and that emerged from that Renaissance stage, and that is revenge tragedy. These plays, revenge tragedies, were immensely popular in Elizabethan time, and the stories of these tragedies were basically revolve around a protagonist who seeks to right a terrible wrong, and it is usually the murder or maybe the betrayal, and they take justice into their own hand. The stakes are very personal and the consequences are devastating. For example, Hamlet remains the most iconic revenge tragedy, and Shakespeare's genius was to take a familiar formula. Hamlet was the wronged son, his father's ghostly visit, or the blood oath, and all these elements together transform it into a meditation on doubt, conscience, and the human condition. There is a famous anecdote that when Hamlet premiered around 1600, audiences were so grappled by the ghost scene that some reportedly fainted in fright. Even Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Romantic poet and critic, he once confessed that he was haunted by the ghost of Hamlet's father for days after seeing the play performed. So we can see that the emotional pull of this drama is timeless. There was struggle, Hamlet struggled to obey his father's command for revenge, and while wrestling with his own moral hesitation. And these two things inspired generations of writers and even thinkers. T.S. Eliot described Hamlet as the Mona Lisa of literature. But Hamlet was not alone on the revenge stage. Thomas Kyd's Spanish tragedy, and it often credited as prototype of English revenge play, because it sets the template with ghost, secret plots, and bloody endings. Another example, we have John Webster's The Duchess of Malfi, which in fact pushed the genre into even darker territory. And these revenge play didn't just entertain, they made audience question the true cost of revenge. So what makes revenge tragedy so enduringly fascinating? What's the reason? So writers from Shakespeare to modern critics, they all have pointed out that these stories force us to confront troubling questions about justice, about anger, and the limits of morality. As the celebrated critic A.C. Bradley put it, that the revenger is never the same at the end as he was at the beginning. The genre's power lies in its capacity to disturb and to provoke. And moreover, it invites us to reflect on our responses to wrong and retribution. So as we transition into the modern era from the 19th century onward, tragedy undergoes a profound transformation. It reflects that upheaval of industrialization, world wars, and in fact those social values that shift with time. So we no longer confine to the tales of kings and noblemen, but modern tragedy mirror the anxiety or struggles of day-to-day life or of common people. And this shift is evident in the works of playwrights like Henrik Ibsen, whose work A Doll's House actually shocked audiences by dramatizing a woman's quest for independence in a constraining society. So in modern era, the world was changing, and so were our ideas about nobility, heroism, and fate, even social problems. However, modern tragedy often centers on ordinary individuals rather than these legendary figures that we found in classical tragedy and Elizabethan tragedy. For example, Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, and that's a landmark example. Willy Loman, a weary traveling salesman, he embodies that shattered American dream. And Miller himself once said that the common man is as apt a subject for tragedy as kings are. And the play's debut was so emotionally charged that audience reportedly wept openly in the theater. And the audience was so moved by the depth of Loman's despair. And I think that's the victory of this tragedy. However, the tragedy of Willy's life is not grand in that classical sense, but because it is universal. His longing for recognition, his denial for reality, and his ultimate downfall resonate with the struggle or emotions of common people. And this shift reflects a dramatic age, and how a person's life can carry tragic weight. Another defining feature of modern tragedy is its focus on social and psychological forces rather than fate or divine intervention. The tragic hero's downfall here often stems from those societal pressures, or you can say economic hardship, or maybe the inner turmoil. Consider the aftermath of Great Depression when playwright Clifford Odets wrote this play, Awake and Sing. He was actually captured the despair and resilience of working class family. So the struggles are deeply human and usually shaped by forces that is beyond those forces beyond individual control. So modern tragedy invite us to see ourselves into those protagonists and to recognize how the forces of society or psychology and history shape our life and our surroundings. There is also another type of tragedy, and this is what we call domestic tragedy. These are tragedy basically those plays that focus on private and family life rather than public, or you can say political event. Basically these domestic tragedies explore how ordinary family relationship can become the source of that extraordinary suffering. For example, think about Eugene O'Neill's famous play Long Day's Journey into Night. And here in this tragedy, in this play, a family is destroying itself through addiction, resentment, and most importantly, the inability to communicate with one another. And here, what makes this domestic tragedy powerful? The answer is intimacy. We recognize these people, these situations, and this tragedy feels closer to home, literally. We start to feel that these are the stories of our own home, and we quickly connect with them. So, we will stop here for today. So, take a moment to think about which type of tragedy feels more relevant to you. There are so many types we have discussed in today's session. Which one is your favorite? In our next lecture, we are going to discuss another important type of drama, and that is comedy. Comedy and its type. The next lecture will be very interesting. So take care of yourself, and thank you for listening.